Hello again, Struckweb. Today I'm bringing you another build video for Wolcen, Words of Mayhem. This one is kind of a hybrid build as it's using the Golems, Livor Mortis together with Anomaly and with PlagueBurst and Havoc Orb. It is called by me Immortal Havoc Golemancer due to the Immortal offering passive that gives us damage based on how many element stacks an enemy has when it dies. Then Havoc Orb and the Golems Livor Mortis. It is a fun setup. It's not your typical meta speedrunning setup for 187s. It would be perfect to be doing 163 enemy level runs because you can't get any better stats than 163. If you're doing 187s, the only thing you're getting better is more magic find and more XP. So if you want to be doing 163s with this build, you would be doing okay. Not as fast as someone with Bleeding Edge, but you can actually use Bleeding Edge with this build if you choose to. If you're using a dagger, you can use Bleeding Edge and you can replace the PlagueBurst for Sovereign Shout for extra attack speed and more globe generation. It will work great. So here you can see me kind of pushing the limits with the timer on Greed Shrine. Of course I couldn't open all chests, but it actually does well. Basically what gives you a ton of damage for this build is the curse, Mark of Impurity. If you level up Mark of Impurity to 59, so you can get all the skill modifiers, and if you're using the modifier that explodes enemies when they die, you would be getting a ton of damage when grouping up enemies together. So the main source of damage is not our skills, it's Mark of Impurity. So if you have a trial belt, you don't have to put it on your skill bar, but if you don't have the trial belt on your number 5 instead of PlagueBurst, I strongly recommend using Mark of Impurity. And most people don't have the trial belt, so that's probably what you would be doing until you get it. The build is fun, the build is nice. It could feel a bit boring sometimes, especially on bosses with regeneration, but I hope you like it, so sit back, relax, and first off I would show you the skills that I'm using and the alternative options. Let's talk about the active skills and their modifiers that I chose to pick. So throughout the footage you're seeing, I would mostly be using this setup: Anomaly, triple golems, PlagueBurst and Havoc Orb. There's also option to switch Havoc Orb for Bleeding Edge when using a dagger, and to use instead of PlagueBurst Sovereign Shout. If you don't have a trial belt, which is this one, you would want to be using Mark of Impurity. You would want to be using Mark of Impurity on one of the slots. Triple Golems is a bit of an overkill for some of the easy content, so while leveling you could go for one golem, then when you need extra survivability 2, and when you need even more survivability 3. How you get 3 golems? You take the skill and you duplicate it. I think it costs 5000 affinity. Then you have to level up the duplicated skill to a certain level, so you can duplicate it again. I think level 30-40 is what you need, maybe 50 before you can duplicate. Then you duplicate it another time and then you can have 3 golems. This is how it's done. So let's go through the modifiers that I would like to use. On Anomaly, must have skills vortex pulls enemies multiple times, must have increased area of the damaging vortex, must have increased duration, and I strongly suggest getting element chance score. Then something that's a great synergy with PlagueBurst is globes put into the damaging vortex explode, and this gives us chance for explosions to drop a health globe. Optionally, here you can take average damage, which barely adds anything, so I'd stay away from this. Element damage, which is not our main source of damage, so I'd stay away from this. And then you can get crit chance score or crit damage. And since I've put everything into toughness, you might want to experiment and put more points into ferocity, because 82,000 HP is an overkill. I think 40, 50, 60 would be enough in regards to 1000 HP. For the golems, you want to modify them for whitening so you can have the mages. Mages can attack from afar, and they are great. The active skill, once it's summoned, is kind of a very underwhelming one. It's just a shield which you don't need. So at least they can be fast and they can apply elements quickly. What I mean by being fast and apply elements quickly, that's it. Increase attack speed for summon and gains an increased chance to inflict ailments on enemies. So we can stack up whitening shock ailments. This is a must-have. Generation Grief. A portion of the damage received by you is transmitted to the summon. You might want to experiment and use the basic golem or use the Shadow Warrior one. So let's show you one of each. How the setup would look if we got one of each. So you have the Shadow Warrior, which does shadow damage, inflicts cursed, but it's melee. You have this one, Toxic, inflicts poison, but again it's melee. Then you have the Ranger that can afflict kind of what's it called, shock. I prefer the mages, so triple mages is my preferred way of playing the setup. So up to you how you're gonna play the mages, but my suggestion is whitening. Here, PlagueBurst must have chance for explosions to drop health globe. Strongly suggest chance to inflict enemies. Strongly suggest leaves a poisonous cloud when an enemy or friendly summon dies, dealing damage over time. Strongly suggest this so we can cast it where we cast Anomaly. And increased explosion damage for each element stack a monster has. I think this is broken right now and doesn't work, but when it does, it would be great with this setup, because I've gotten up to 30 stacks per ailment type. That means 7 ailment types times 30, that's 210 ailment stacks on an enemy, which would severely increase the damage when it works. And then this point is optional. I mean, you can probably get rid of this one if it doesn't work and just do something else. But yeah, this is how I like to play it. And what does it mean, explosions? If you are wondering, this skill explodes when enemies die or summons. We're not exploding our summons, so we're only relying on the enemies exploding when they die. And then there's Havoc Orb. We're dumping Rage with Havoc Orb. That's why we're using 2 Rage Potions. So I'm converting this to Rend so I can apply bleeding and get the 25% bleeding damage buff from Immortal offering, and to be stacking bleeding stacks on the enemies. This one I prefer it because it makes it shoot rockets, and this one makes the rockets being, instead of just 1, 5 rockets. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So with that we can shoot a lot of rockets as long as we keep the rage up. And it keeps us in place for those 5 shots, but with this build we can afford to be in place. So I would suggest increased chance to inflict ailments, I would suggest increased weapon damage twice, but you might wanna play differently. As I said, you might wanna change things a little if you're going for a build with a dagger instead of a pistol, although this can be used with a dagger too. If you want bleeding catch, this is what I would suggest as modifiers. If you wanna be using Blade Storm, this is what I would suggest as modifiers. And if you want to replace PlagueBurst with the Shout, I suggest Block Chance, I suggest Health Glove Generation, I suggest Resistance Core. This goes up to 10 stacks per enemy, so 150% of resistance score with 10 enemies nearby. This is optional. I would suggest the duration, I would suggest the effectiveness, because you can see it gives you bonuses. So this is optional and this is optional. You might wanna get more move speed, you might wanna get Wife Leech, but block chance is nice. 15 block chance is amazing. The duration is like 7 seconds, I think, and it was its cooldown is 5.1. I think it's good this way if you want to do it that way. You can even use Juggernaut if you want without one of the golems, or Wings of Ishmir without one of the golems, but if you use Wings of Ishmir, I suggest modifying it to cost stamina and then modifying the shout to give you stamina, like this. So that's some alternative choices if you want to be doing boss fights and you're ending up not having enough rage generation. Use Arctic Spear here to dump. This is how I like to use the Arctic Spear. You might want to use it differently. And you can dump Supercast. So you want this point here. Spears are delayed while recasting, allowing you to cast multiple spears at once. This will be allowing you to dump willpower super quickly. Like this. You can see how my willpower is getting dumped into rage, and then I can do some shooting. You can even do it at the same time. You can be casting spears and casting orbs at the same time. Of course, the spears will not be cast as fast. So that's some options. Hopefully you like them. There's many other options, like if you need fire stacks, convert solar foe into fire, or use this setup for consuming embers with piercing and keep it as a fire one. But my main suggestion is the PlagueBurst combo. Now let's show you a bit about the stat allocation, the passive stat allocation. For the stats, what I picked up was a full toughness dump. But as I said, you don't need as much toughness. 40, 50, 60, maybe 70 HP in thousands might be enough. Find your perfect balance, spend the rest into ferocity or wisdom, avoid agility. I only have 3 pieces of toughness, 2 pieces of ferocity on my armors and 3 armors with agility. So I would preferably get more ferocity or toughness from my items rather than agility. Even wisdom is a better choice for status element chance score. Now let's talk about the aspects of the apocalypse. The aspects of apocalypse are apocalyptic forms that kind of are underwhelming at the higher level content. At the early level content maybe they could help you. While leveling they can provide you with immortality for a few seconds and a little bit of damage. That's not great, but it's still better than nothing. I don't like this one, so any of the other 3 are fine. I really like that one when going for a material build, and when going for occult builds I like that one. This one also goes well with the occult builds. So pick any one you like, and most of the times you would be just using this when playing with others and they're down and you wanna rest them without taking damage. Now let's talk about the passive skills. The passive skills are kind of flexible, and there are around 20 or more points that you don't need immediately and you can get later. First of all, I got cooldown here and here and here. You might not want that much cooldown if your gear gives you enough. So those points you probably don't need immediately, those points. Here if you don't need the cooldown you can go HP, or you can go crit damage, cooldown HP, up to you. So those 4 points you can take later, those 3 points you can take later, this point you can take later, those points you can take later as long as you're using heavy piece to give you the block chance with any weapon. And there's those 3 points you can take later, and those 3 points you can take later, those 4 points as well. This point can come later as well, and this point can come later as well. Those are nice to have. So let's go about the core things. Rush this point here, then maybe get this here immediately, but I'd suggest wait on that and get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Then move on to 1 point, 2 points, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is important because this doubles the resistance score on your heavy chest and heavy helmet, and this is why we're using a heavy chest and helmet. More about that in the gear segment. So those 3 points come later, those 3 points may come later, or you might even skip them at all and not take them. This is nice to apply poison stacks in enemies around you. You can stay near the enemies, you can survive, so that's fine. This gives us a ton of damage reduction for our summons, and reduces our HP by roughly around, around 50% of our HP is removed. But the summons take roughly around 85% less damage, which is amazing because they're taking some of the damage we take on themselves. So rush this, then move on to get some of this, some damage. I will do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 points. You can speed it up and do it instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and later respec and revert it. Ideally those points would come later for the stacks, which you don't need immediately. This one is nice to grab, this one can come later. This one is also amazing to grab as soon as you can. And then we move on to this point here. And then here, get that before this. So you're getting the Dire Juncture, this can wait. Then you get this, which gives us extra 100% damage 1.5 seconds after the enemy takes damage if it's afflicted with stasis, and with Anomaly they will be afflicted with stasis all the time. After that go into Downspire Striker and Sudden Death that allows us to execute enemies including champions when we take this one when they have 15 or lower HP. I suggest attack damage. Instead of attack damage, spell plus sacred and sacred damage. It's just a better way to do it in my opinion with this way of playing the build. Now there's options. If you want crit scores, get the crit scores like crit damage, crit score for 78 crit score. If you want crit damage and crit score for the price of regular damage, you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points here. And another way to get crit score is over here, which brings us to attack speed stuff. This is only good if you're critting often, otherwise avoid it. Another super important thing that you might wanna get for double damage and some block chances: attack speed HP, element resistance passive dodge chance, block chance with one-handed weapon, then this and this. This converts the willpower regeneration to rage regeneration, and this gives you double damage when your rage is over 750 for the price of double rage cost. This is for attacks or spells, it doesn't matter as long as it's a skill that does the damage. So keep that in mind, that if you take this you might wanna get more rage and willpower. 200 from here, then 150 from here, and then you can get another 100 from here. Of course this first, this next, and then those last if you want that. And since we were talking about attack speed, you can get this 10% attack speed score. Then from this you can get, for the price of 50% all resistance score when maxed in the stacks, you get 150 attack speed score and 1% wife leech. Then you can get another 0.5% of wife leech and another 50% attack speed score, which is great. That gives us a total of 200 attack speed score, which can stack with this 75% attack speed score and even this 50% attack speed score. So there's a lot of things you can take, very flexible build. I would stay away from a disallowing vessel for survivability and all resistance score. I would stay away from the tenets, which were, I think, where was tenets? I would stay away from the tenets, which is here, the branded burst. You really don't need that much damage reduction. You are fine the way it is. And if you want more block efficiency, you can get those points here. Don't get this block chance, it only works with two-handed weapons. Only get them if you find some sort of a weird build to play this with a two-hander that gives you Anomaly and Livor Mortis. But yeah, I think that pretty much sums up a lot of the things you can get for the build that could be useful. Another thing you might consider is rages for picking up health globes. It's not bad, it's nice. So keep that in mind, it's also gonna help, and you might even wanna get element chance score if you need it together with one of the other or all others. A lot of things have been said. Hopefully this helps you figure out how to build your passives. And next would be some info about the gear and suggested item rows. Gear wise, there's a lot of things to consider, so First of all, as I said, heavy helmet and chest piece, and you have to make choices. You want very high resistances, but you also need cooldown. If you have to sacrifice cooldown for resistances, do it on the chest piece, because the bonus from this one would be bigger than the helmet. This is exactly what I did. I didn't choose to get less resistance on the chest, but more cooldown. I chose to get less resistance but more cooldown on the helmet, and you can see why I did this. The cooldown here is 5.8, but if I remove that 38 cooldown, I get a cooldown of 7.5, and you can see my resistances. Yes, they are nice with this helmet, but even with the other one, it's okay. I can manage. So the same goes for the other pieces of equipment, but the other pieces of equipment, my suggestion would be go for bruiser armor. Heavy here, the rest bruiser like this one. Super high resistance, super high HP on a bruiser piece is what you might want to prioritize. Again, you want cooldown reduction on the legs if you can, so ideally you would have cooldown reduction on the chest, helmet and legs. If you have to sacrifice one for more resists, pick the chest, because there's more to be gained there. This is getting doubled by the passives, and this is getting doubled the resistances by the passive. Then here you have a perfect example of a nice item. It could be better, it has 4 out of 6 good stats, but it has flat resistance, percent resistance, flat HP, it's missing percent HP, which could make it over 2000 HP altogether. It has rage and cost decrease, and instead of health regen and agility, you would want ferocity or toughness together with maybe some crit chance score or status element chance score or other good things that might be better. So such as resistances like material, occult, etc. Here another health regen agility item that's kind of wasted. Here what I would prefer, instead of health regen and agility, I would like percent all resistance, percent HP. Not so bad though, not so bad. Again, decent HP, decent resists, and it's a bruiser piece with more ferocity as a base. Same goes for this one. Again, it has things that I would rather remove, such as the resource generation I would probably remove, and maybe I would remove the material damage for more HP and resists in percentages, depends. Transfer time reduction is super nice in the helmet, chest and legs, so try to get at least 2 pieces with those. If you're using the trial belt, if you're not using the trial belt, 1 piece with that, but again I would suggest 2, and then you can put transfer time in the ring, amulet and belts for another 4 times 25 if you're not using the trial. If you're using the trial, you get 75 from the 2 rings and amulet in the sockets, so you would need a bit more in the armor, especially since we're using a catalyst. The catalyst kind of negates this. More about the offhand in a moment. So you can see here I've used a heavy armor because I didn't have a good alternative. This was the alternative, and that's 300 resists I'm losing for just 500 HP. Totally not worth it. Also losing ferocity for agility and losing occult resistance for some health regen, and the passive dodge chance I would stay away from as well. So attack speed is not bad, but it's not the best you can get. And yeah, flat resistance plus percent resistance plus flat HP plus percent HP is what ideally you would get with ferocity or toughness and rage and willpower, and maybe some other resists or damage or crit chance. The same goes for the boots, except for the boots you want movement speed. A good amount of movement speed, over 31%, would be ideal. The legs, as I said, cooldown and transfer time are nice, so if you have to sacrifice a little bit of HP like I did to get something with cooldown and transfer time, do so. With this item, my HP for that 2900 extra HP goes from 82,000 to 100,000, but still I'd rather have the cooldown and the transfer time. And for the sockets, go for enough block chance and block efficiency. You You can see I settled down for 73 block chance, 30 block efficiency. Ideally, you would want a dagger or a pistol with a shield, or dagger and a pistol. My ideal setup would be dagger or pistol in the main hand, and in the off hand a shield. And the dagger or the pistol would have, one of them would have Livor Mortis, and the other one allows the bearer to cast Anomaly. That way I can kind of use them without an Eneract, without a Catalyst. I'm gonna lose PlagueBurst that way, but it's fine. Because it's gonna give me so much more survivability, and I wouldn't need to get that much block chance, and I could get more efficiency, and it would be amazing. If you go for two weapons, of course, keep in mind that the second weapon you put in the offhand would not give you that much bonuses, but you're still gonna get the things from the sockets and other things like crit damage, etc. Now we go on to the belt. Trial belt is a must-have, but if you don't have it, you're gonna have to apply Mark of Impurity yourself. So you're gonna have to replace PlagueBurst with Mark of Impurity, or one of the golems with Mark of Impurity, and cast it on the enemies, because the main damage of the build comes from Mark of Impurity's explosions. This one, enemies killed while under the effect of Mark of Impurity explode and deal damage based on the target's max health in an area around them. So this is the main damage source. My suggestion is curse stacks inflicted, chance to inflict ailments, vulnerable, or you can get this vulnerable. I'm not sure what the difference would be. This is what I like to use. So if you don't have a trial, a belt with ailment stacks inflicted, flat damage, crit damage, HP, resistances, damages, crit chance score, etc. would be nice. So ideally 2 stacks inflicted, maybe some pierce, maybe 3 times flat damage to attacks, and crit damage. The same goes for rings. You want steel ring with crit damage 30 at the top, 30 crit damage at the bottom, flat damage to attacks 1, 2 or 3 times, then ailment stacks inflicted, or piercing, +1 piercing to attacks. Alternative option is attacks gain X damage from the last spell cast, or max willpower and rage. There's many things you can get from Untainted runs, but the main thing is you want the 30 crit damage at the top and at the bottom, and you want flat attack damage. The rest is just bonuses. Of course, ailment stacks inflicted is the preferred one probably, but anything's fine, as long as you don't get some of the shit rolls. The same goes for the second ring. Here you can see I kind of have damage to spells, not really wanted, force shooter generation, not really wanted, spellcasting speed score, not really wanted, and this is only 13% at the top, and it doesn't have crit at the bottom. The best base for amulet would be Goat or Omnistar for all attributes. Then you want flat damage to attacks together with 1 or 2 stacks ailment afflicted, and then you want either some crit chance score or crit damage. You actually do want crit damage as a priority, and maybe some other damages, and maybe pierce. So this is something that you can consider. Pierce, ailment stacks, but damage to spells. I would suggest avoid damage to spells, and you can use things like Genesis Stone and Ohm's Echo or Arabian Tier if the item doesn't have all the stacks, to apply ailments or pierce like this. See, this gave me pierce on an amulet. If you don't have Genesis Stones, you have to farm Untainted runs. So you have to go here, start an expedition of a preferred level like 163. Keep in mind 163 is the highest level you need to do to get the best item stats. After that, all the way to 187 is just more XP and more wood magic find. It won't give you better item rows, item stats in the brackets. So you roll through modifiers 4 times, and once you have rolled 4 times you can wear Untainted. The limit is 5 rows plus Untainted for a total of 6 modifiers. Then the enemies would not drop items, but at the end they would drop wood from a chest, and chest would also drop items. You would be able to get ailment stacks inflicted, pierce, attacks gain X damage, max willpower and rage, things like shields or weapons that give you different skills that normally can be used with those items, even catalysts that give you certain skills. So you might want to be farming those runs when you can spare the gold and affinity to do so. I hope this kind of sums it up. For the weapon, I really want to advise you to pick something that gives you damage that you need. I need fire because I can't afflict fire burning stacks easy, so I decided to go for a weapon that gives me elemental damage, and fire being one of those, and I even put fire gems. So what you want on the weapon is crit damage, and you want 3 times flat damage with percent of the type of damage. So if I have fire, frost and lightning flat with percent elemental, it's gonna be a god rolled weapon. I'm saving this 6th slot on this weapon so I can add it when they fix the crafting to be the way it was advertised before launch and to be more user friendly. But you would want maybe some wife leech, maybe some crit chance together with crit damage, and 3 times flat with percent of the damage type. So physical rend toxic plus material, sacred shadow aether plus occult, or fire frost lightning plus elemental. So on this one I would want to add flat lightning to make it god rolled weapon. So yeah, just find out what you can't apply with spells and get that damage from gems and from the weapon. The same goes for a dagger. I mean, if you have 3 times flat, it's fine. If you have 2 times flat and percent of the damage type, the damage archetype, then that's fine as well. Of course, dagger is more versatile, but pistol also lets you use Havoc orb. You would want, ideally, as I said, using a shield, so there's that. A good unique ring you might consider is the Shadow Call. It's not great, but it's still better than a bad ring. I think that's it for the skills, so next you're gonna see some gameplay and info about how to combo the build. Now I'm gonna talk about the build itself, how to play it, what combos you might consider doing and where the damage comes from. As mentioned, the damage from Mark of Impurity's explosions when enemies die is the main source of damage. So you want to use Anomaly to group up and vacuum the enemies in a tight bunch, and then you also want to immediately use PlagueBurst to get those globes spawning, and there will be globes spawning, there will be explosions from those globes, there will be explosions when the enemies die from PlagueBurst, and most importantly there would be explosions when the enemies die due to Mark of Impurity. The main source of damage would be those explosions. Based on how much HP an enemy has, there will be more damage. So you might wanna group up elites together, or untainted enemies together with elites, or pull some elites or untainted enemies next to bosses, so that when you kill whomever has less HP, it would explode and do more damage to the ones that have higher HP. It would be super difficult on some bosses with regeneration if you don't have enemies around you. For such cases you might really need to switch to a dagger and use bleeding edge, or try and pull more enemies. On 187, a healer boss with adds that heal him and with regeneration is almost impossible to kill without switching to a bleeding edge setup or to a blade storm or something else that might do a bit more damage than the Havoc orb. See, for bosses like this one, only 34 million HP, even though he has regeneration and it's slowing the whole process, it's not that bad. But at one point on bosses with regeneration you might run out of rage even with the potions, and then you might wanna switch to Arctic Spear so you can spam and dump your willpower while spamming and dumping your rage with Havoc orb. I hope this is pretty clear how to play it. It's not rocket science, just group them up, get them to explode and hurt each other with the explosions and rinse repeat. that should be it. If you've enjoyed the video, you can subscribe to my channel to get notified when I upload more content for Wolcen, Torchlight 3, Borderlands 3 or Warhammer Chaosbane. Feel free to also smash the like or dislike buttons, and thank you for watching the video. Keep it cool folks, and until next time, goodbye.